16th chapter, Jesus has just told the parable of the rascal that took money and made some friends with it so that when he was unemployed, he would have a means of support from those friends that he had helped while he was employed and had the funds. And Jesus made the point at the end of the story that we ought to use worldly wealth, this is verse 9, to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So Jesus is talking about money. He's talking about material resources. He's talking about all the things that we have in this world. And he's saying here that we ought to use these things to glorify God. He goes on to talk about our attitude toward money and things. We all live in a material world. We have to eat and drink and work, and we have money as a medium of exchange in our commerce. And every one of us are concerned about putting life together, making sure we have enough money to cover the month and to pay our bills, and we finance our houses and our farms and our tractors and our automobiles, and we're concerned about our bank accounts and our certificates of deposit and our retirement funds and our Social Security. So we live in a world of money, where money is a medium of exchange. Now, there's nothing wrong with money in and of itself. Money is simply paper currency, printed green and black ink, mostly printed on paper, or stamped on silver or gold or copper. It's just a medium of exchange. Money is amoral in and of itself. If money were evil, then we could not handle it. We could not have any with us today. We could not even give it to the church. And we could not give anything to help the poor. But money itself is not evil. It's just a medium of exchange of goods. And Jesus is saying here, in this world, don't get so wrapped up in money and things that you make that your priority and your God. Because you're going to die. And that money is going to die with you, as it were. It's going to be buried in the grave with you, as it were. You're going to be gone. And then you're going to be before God. And all the money in the world cannot buy salvation or a ticket to heaven or a relationship with God. It's strictly of this world. And when Jesus comes, all the money in the world, all the gold in Fort Knox will be turned into cinders and ashes. It's all going to be gone. And we're going to stand before God based upon the life that we live of faith and love and trust and obedience to Him. So Jesus tells us then in verse 10, as he continues this discussion about money, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. And what Jesus is saying here is that we need to be good managers. You know, if you can't trust me with $5, then you couldn't trust me with $500 or $5,000. Because if you can't trust me in the little things, then you certainly couldn't trust me in the big things. You know, probably none of us will ever write a book. None of us will probably ever have dinner with the president. None of us will probably ever be elected to a state office. None of us will ever be voted Citizen of the Year in the state of Illinois. You know, we won't do those big things. But we can do the little things. We can write a note to a friend. We can visit a neighbor in the nursing home. We can bake a pie and take it to a new neighbor that just moved in down the block. Well, we can pray for someone who is suffering and hurting. We can give a gift to the poor of some groceries or help with a utility bill or a house rent. We can smile and put down our cell phones and our laptops and look someone in the eye and seriously and intently listen to them as they pour out their grief of their heart. We can do those little things. And Jesus says it's the little things that make a difference in life. And he is talking about making sure that you do the little things well, because that's a sign of integrity. I learned this from my wife. I've learned a lot of lessons from her in 52 years. I am the type of guy that always wants to do one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. She'll say, it's time for supper, come and get it. I'll say, I got one more thing to do. And 5-10 minutes later, I walk in because I got that thing done. And then the supper's getting a little cold. She's a little irritated because she prepared it, served it right, and she's ready to go. And I always say, one more thing, one more thing. That little thing makes a difference. I learned this. Also, when we would make, we were living in Houston, and I was working 50 miles from the house and had to drive through traffic. And I often stopped at Walmart on the way home or the grocery store because we lived out in the country and didn't want to go back for those things. And so she'd say, now what time are you going to be home for supper? And I'd say, 5:30. She'd say, okay, I'll have it ready at 5:30. Well, on the way home, I thought of something I needed at Walmart. I needed something, pick up a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread or something like that. I need to stop and buy some more light bulbs or something, you know. And so I don't walk into the house until 6:30 at night. She's upset. She's irritated. You told me you'd be here at 5:30. I say, well, 5:30, 6:30, I'm here, let's eat. She says, look, if I can't trust you to keep your word about when you tell me you're going to be home and these little things, how do I know you're faithful to me in the big things? Wow, that pierced my heart. And that's what Jesus is saying. If you're not faithful in the little things, how can you be faithful, trusted in big things? See, integrity must be learned, must be earned by the repetition of faithful deeds. I like to hear a child say thank you, or ma'am, or yes sir, or please, and thank you. I love to hear children saying that. And I look at that child and say, that child's been well trained. That child is mannered. That child is learning respect. That child is going to grow up and probably is not going to be one of those that's going to end up dead at 13 from using drugs or in the penitentiary or something, because they're learning little things about respect, morality, doing good. And so Jesus is saying, if you're faithful in little, you'll be faithful in much. Jesus is saying here, don't let money be your God. He goes on to say that no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Notice Jesus says you cannot. He didn't say you should not. He didn't say you ought not to. He didn't say it would be hard not to. He didn't say I suggest that you think about. He said you cannot serve both God and money. Now money here is personified. It's given a life, a voice. But money, of course, as you know, doesn't speak. It's kind of like on TV at night. It's called metonymy in the grammar, where sometimes something is said that represents something else, but you know it's not the literal thing. For example, the news reporter will say this. Today the White House reported that we had 4% unemployment and the economy is up. Now the White House, that 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the House didn't say anything. The White House stands for the President and his administration. And so when Jesus said you cannot serve God and money, money stands for the things, the resources, the equipment, the properties, the investments of this world. You cannot serve this world and God at the same time. You will either love God or you will hate God and love the other. So you cannot serve both God and money. We saw a movie this week. Maybe you've seen it on Netflix. It was at the theater. I rented it also earlier on DVD at Redbox, called The Founder. It's the story of Ray Kroc and how he built the McDonald's empire. Now, there are McDonald's all over the world. And I like McDonald's. They have good coffee. And life is too short to drink bad coffee. I also like their chicken nuggets, and I'll eat a sandwich or two occasionally and French fries. But let me tell you about Ray Kroc. In the 1950s, 1954, he was selling mixers for milkshakes, going restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, trying to sell milkshake mixers that would mix 6 at a time. And he worked hard, and he was persistent, but he was having a struggle. This little restaurant in San Bernardino, California, ordered 6 of his mixers. Never heard of anybody wanting 6. Make 36 milkshakes at a time. So he said, I've got to go check this out. What's going on? He went to San Bernardino, California, and ran into the McDonald brothers, who were running a little hamburger place. And they had it all organized, and they had everything planned, and everybody had a place, and they could give you a hamburger within 30 seconds of ordering. You had your food in your hand, which was very unusual. So he got the idea. He wanted to get in on this business. So he made a deal with them, and he started building restaurants and working with them in Des Plaines and St. Louis and Waukegan and other places. And finally, he wanted to control McDonald's. But they had the name, and he said, I want to run the property. I want to hold the real estate. So finally, it came to the point where he was getting more and more and more involved, and they were hanging on to their little restaurant, their name, and they didn't want to change things. They wanted to keep it the way it was. So he made a deal with them. He met with them, and he said, I want to buy you out. I want to buy you out. I'll give you $1 million. And we'll sign the contract right here. And they said, well, we want it in the contract that we get 1% of all the profits. He said, oh, my banker won't allow that. He was lying. He was lying. He said, they said the only thing we can do is just shake hands on the deal. They said, oh, I don't know about that. They said, well, come on, shake hands. I'll keep my word. They shook hands, and he'd give them 1% of all the profits. From that time on, he owned McDonald's. He made it to a worldwide empire. He never paid them a dime. If he had paid them the 1%, it would have been worth over $100 million at the time the movie was made. The point is, his word meant nothing. His handshake meant nothing. His promise meant nothing. Why? The love of money. The love of power. The love of building an empire. The love of aggravating himself. So, he ended up being a pretty serious drinker. His wife wasn't pretty enough, so he divorced her. He found another man's wife, and she divorced her husband, and they together formed and built the empire. So his life crashed, tumbled in because the love of money, the love of power. And my wife says, I don't even like to eat McDonald's anymore because of that. Well, don't blame brother, what's his name, Cooney? Pat Cooney. Don't blame Pat Cooney. You can go in there and have your restaurant. It's not his fault. Ray Kroc did years ago. But what I'm getting at is money will destroy you. Money will make you lie. Money will make you act unethical. Money will make you mistreat people. Money will make you do anything to get more money. Now, you just go around and talk to some people and say, what do you want in life? How much money would it take to make you happy? Ask that question. Have you noticed on the television, we've had all the news about the mega lottery? $432 million! And if you won the other lottery, you would have $1 billion if you won both of them. What would you do? They're on television. They go up to people and say, what would you do if you won the lottery? And they're all buying tickets and lined up for blocks to get the tickets. What would you do? And they'll say, well, I tell you what, I'd buy my mother a new car, or I'd give her a new house, or I would give it to charity, or I'd give half of it to the church. Stop it. Well, how much money are you making now? Oh, I'm making $500 a week. Oh. Okay, out of that $500, how much are you giving to your mother? How much are you giving to the church? How much are you giving to charity? You see, if you can't be trusted with the $10 you got in your pocket now, you couldn't be trusted if you had $10 million in your pocket. And Jesus is saying, whether you're rich or poor, on the economic scale doesn't make any difference. It's a matter of attitude. You see, money, Jesus talks about three things: how you make it, how you use it, and how you regard it. And Jesus is saying, don't love money. It will control you. Don't love the things of this world. More and more and more and more. I was driving down the freeway in Mobile, Alabama, and there was a 40-foot billboard that caught my attention. It was from a local bank. It was advertising their loan department. And in big block letters, it said, "Come and get what you'd never get enough of." And that's the way people think about money. I want more and more and more and more. Have you read the book of Ecclesiastes lately? Solomon was the richest man in all the world. The Queen of Sheba came to see him, and she said, "Well, the half has not yet been told about how rich and great and powerful you are." Chapters 1 and 2 of Ecclesiastes describes his wealth and his power and his gardens and his servants and his women and his money. And as you read through the book, it talks about vanity of vanities. And I think that expression is about 11 times in the book. Vanity of vanity, vanity of vanity. All is vanity. And finally get to the end. What is the most important thing? Chapter 12 begins, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth." And the last paragraph says, everything has been heard. This is the sum of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Several hundred people buried out here in the cemetery, right here on the edge of town. But 6 foot under, everybody's equal. I don't care how big your monument is. I don't care what it says on it. It may say gone, but not forgotten. But let me tell you, I've seen a lot of tombstones that say that. Those people are not only gone, they are forgotten. And we're all moving on too. I'm moving on. You're moving on. We're a week older than we were a week ago. Every day gets us closer to the end. To the coming of Jesus or to our death. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're not what we used to be in age. And what God is saying here is don't love money because it's dying. And if you live for the things that die, you're going to die with it. He says love God. Do God's will. How do you do God's will? He's talking about helping other people. He's talking about ministering to people. He says in the whole lesson in verse 9 was, use worldly wealth to gain friends. That is to serve people, to meet people's needs. I was preparing the sermon yesterday. I think preachers ought to practice what they preach, don't you? It kind of got my heart with it. So I went in there to the kitchen and I had bought up all kinds of apples and bananas and grapefruit and oranges. And Judy said, "What are you doing? Going to open a produce stand?" I mean, we had more than we could eat in 3-4 weeks. And as I prepared my sermon, I thought, I need to share this with someone. So I went in there and got a sack and started putting apples and oranges in a big old sack and tied it up. I said, "I'll give it this one." It felt so good. God had given it to me. I didn't earn it. I didn't deserve it. And I'm showing His Word works in me. I'm trying to use what He gave me to help others. You put your money in the plate every Sunday. Did you know we spend $250 a month from this church treasury to help orphan children at Schultz Lewis in Valparaiso, Indiana? And $250 additional per month to help Elijah and Kristen Peters preach the gospel and serve Christ in Auckland, New Zealand. We're investing. And you know, when life is over, the only thing we're going to have left is what we invest in eternity. And the Lord talked about laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And the way you lay up treasures in heaven is by serving people on earth who are going to heaven. And you give to them who are needy. We have some needy people in our congregation, in our community. And at Christmas time, this church gave gifts to some people. Said, we love you, we appreciate you. Have a Merry Christmas. The church just wants to help. We know you have needs. It felt so good to give. The Bible says, freely you've received, freely give. And so Jesus is teaching us here that the way to love God, how do you show love for God? Is by loving God's people and loving people. And so when I show love for you and help you and show interest in you and support you and others, then I am loving God who created you. And we're all going to meet God someday. So, one man had put on his tombstone these words. What I had, I spent. What I saved, I lost. What I gave, I now have. So Jesus is teaching us here. Don't love money. Look at the verse 11. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and sneered at Jesus. You know what the word sneered literally means in the Greek language? Literally, it means to turn your nose up at. Literally. They loved money. They loved power. They loved pride. They loved position. They loved accomplishment. And Jesus said to them, you're the ones who justify yourself in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. In other words, to other people, they were rich and pompous and powerful and ecclesiastical leaders and scripture memorizers and quoters and teachers and leaders of the synagogue. And Jesus said, God knows your heart. It's not performance. It's purity. It's not what's on the outside. It's what's on the inside. And what Jesus is saying here, now this gets to the root of the matter. It's not just what you do that matters. It's why you do it. Why do you do it? Sometimes I've been concerned about the preaching and teaching that I've done and that I've heard, where I emphasize that we are the right church because we do all the right things. We meet on the first day of the week, Sunday, the day of Christ's resurrection. We take the Lord's Supper every Sunday. We sing without any machinery. We don't have what other churches have. We don't have this. We don't have that. We don't do that. We do this. So therefore, we are right. The Pharisees could say the same thing in their categories. We know the Scriptures. We teach the Scriptures. We tithe. We fast twice a week. We don't commit adultery. We don't rob temples. We don't steal from other people. Remember Luke chapter 18, the publican and the Pharisee? And the Pharisee said, Lord, I'm not like that old tax collector over there. And the tax collector wouldn't even look up to heaven, but hit himself in the breast and said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus said, that man went down to his house justified or right with God, and not the other man. The other man did everything right. But he didn't love God in his heart of hearts. He didn't respect God's word about purity and righteousness and integrity and truth and love and joy and faith. It was more performance-oriented. And what Jesus is saying to us, God knows your hearts. So what we want to do today then in this lesson is learn that God looks at our heart. Not only what we do, but why do we do it? What's the meaning? And are we really involved or just going through forms? And the Lord is saying here, you can't serve yourself and serve God. So the Bible talks about deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Love God. Do God's will. Do what's right. We don't live for ourselves, but we live for Christ. And Christ is in us, the hope of glory. And we're here to serve Him. So thank God for everything you have, and I have. And use what you have and what God has given you for the glory of God. And when we die, as we all will, and as we all shall, unless Jesus returns first, everything that we gain to help others, to serve God's will, to show love for God, with a heart of hearts loving Him, will be treasures in heaven. Treasures. Being with God in perfect joy forever and forever, where all our needs are eternally met. You're subject to God's call, and we can assist you today in any way to confess Christ, to be baptized into Christ, or for prayers, or for any other need on your heart. We're just God's family here. We're here to help you today. Come forward, make it known while we stand.
I hear the Savior say, thy strength